Listen, because this isn't just another royal story. This isn't just family drama dressed up in crowns and titles. This is about money, power, silence, and a decision so cold it echoed across the monarchy like a crack in the marble floors. King Charles made his move. Quietly, cleanly, no shouting, no press conference, just a line drawn so sharp it left a mark. Prince Harry was told, without ceremony and without comfort, that if he was done working for the crown, then he was also done living on the crown's money. No more safety nets paid by taxpayers. No more quiet bills picked up behind closed doors. No more pretending this was all about fear instead of who was footing the bill. And that message didn't arrive gently. It landed like a slap. For the first time since Harry walked away from royal duties, someone finally said it out loud. If you leave, you pay. Not the public, not the system, you. For years, Harry has repeated the same sentence like a shield. He said he wasn't safe in the UK. He said his life was in danger. He said coming home without police protection was reckless, terrifying, impossible. That fear became the backbone of everything. The lawsuits, the interviews, the headlines, the dramatic warnings. It was always danger, danger, danger. But then, something small surfaced. Something ordinary. Something that didn't match the story at all. A door camera clip, no ambush, no flashing lights, no security detail forming a human wall, just Harry, alone, wandering casually up and down the street. No police, no bodyguards, no urgency, no visible fear. He wasn't scanning crowds or rushing indoors. He was killing time, waiting for his friends, like a man deciding which pub to step into. And this wasn't years earlier. This wasn't before the lawsuits. This happened during the exact same period he was suing the British government, claiming he couldn't safely walk the streets. That's the moment the entire narrative cracked. Because fear doesn't take breaks. Real danger doesn't politely step aside when it's inconvenient. And people who genuinely believe they're at risk don't stroll around alone just because it feels easier. Harry had protection available. He chose not to use it. That image didn't just raise eyebrows. It exposed a contradiction no PR statement could erase. And still, Harry pushed forward. He didn't stop at interviews. He sued. Then he sued again. His argument stayed the same. He deserved taxpayer-funded police protection every time he returned to the UK. Not private guards, not personal arrangements. Police, authority, public resources. The courts listened. They reviewed the process. They examined how security decisions were made by the Royal and VIP Executive Committee. And when the ruling came down, it wasn't vague, it wasn't sympathetic, it was firm. The decision to remove Harry's automatic police protection was lawful. No wrongdoing, no unfair process, no abuse of power. Harry lost. And then came the bill. Legal fees piled up fast. Nearly $1.5 million. Then closer to $2 million once everything was tallied. And here's the part that doesn't get said loudly enough that money still hasn't been paid. So on paper, the story should have ended there. The law spoke. The courts closed the door. Harry was not entitled to automatic protection. End of discussion. But that's when things started getting uncomfortable. Because this wasn't really about security logistics. It was about rules. And whether Harry was willing to follow them. Security isn't magic. It isn't vibes or panic or last-minute demands. It's planning. Routes mapped weeks in advance. Locations studied. Patterns analyzed. Officers don't just show up and hope for the best. They need schedules. They need itineraries. They need cooperation. Harry was never denied that process. All he had to do was tell them when he was coming, where he'd stay, where he'd go. He refused. No itinerary. No advance notice. No cooperation. And without that information, security teams can't function. No planning means no deployment. So when Harry said he was left unprotected, what he was really saying was that he didn't want to follow the same rules everyone else had to follow. This wasn't the system failing him. This was him walking away from the system. And then there's the part no one likes to talk about. Money. Private security is expensive. Brutally expensive. Millions every year. Former police officers. International travel. Round-the-clock coverage. It drains accounts fast. Police protection? That's cheaper. Officers are already salaried. Assigning them costs a fraction of private security. And police don't just protect, they bring authority, access, status. So suddenly, the fight didn't look like fear at all. It looked like a financial battle dressed up as moral outrage. If Harry paid for private security, it came from his pocket. If police protected him, the public paid. And once you see that, everything shifts. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Harry didn't inherit all his risk. He created a lot of it. He published details about combat kills. He criticized political leaders. He mocked institutions. He stepped into global political debates where neutrality once protected him. These weren't accidents, they were choices. Each one raised his profile. Each one increased risk. And yet, he wanted the consequences absorbed by the public. That's where the government drew the line, because when risk is self-generated, protection becomes about accountability, not entitlement. And accountability is something Harry has spent years trying to avoid. At this point, everything was clear. Cooperation was required. He refused. Private security cost money. He didn't want to pay. The court said no. That should have been the end, but it wasn't. Because after the law closed the door, something happened that should have never happened at all. Months later, a new security review was quietly ordered. Not suggested, not debated, ordered. A decision reopened after the courts had already ruled. And that's where this story stops being about Harry and starts being about power. Because once the courts had spoken, once the paperwork was stamped and the judgment was final, this story should have gone quiet. That's how systems work. Law decides, everyone adjusts, and life moves on. But instead of silence, there was movement. Quiet movement. The kind that doesn't announce itself. The kind that happens behind doors you're not invited to knock on. A new security review was ordered. And no, that doesn't just happen. The Home Secretary doesn't wake up one morning and casually decide to reopen a case that was already settled in court. Doing that invites backlash, it invites questions, it invites legal chaos. Careers end over decisions like that, so this wasn't random. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't kindness. This was authority. And in Britain's system, there is only one place authority like that can quietly come from without leaving fingerprints all over the paperwork. The Crown. This wasn't Harry winning a legal argument. He already lost those. This was power stepping in after the law said no. And that distinction matters more than anything else in this story. Because suddenly, the rules weren't the same. While the public was being told Harry was a private citizen now, cut off, independent, stripped of royal privilege, something else was happening on the world stage. His travel started telling a different story. Nigeria, Colombia, Ukraine. Each trip wasn't casual. Each one was formal, structured, diplomatic. He wasn't being treated like a celebrity booking a hotel and hiring guards. He was being received, addressed by title, managed through official channels. And that doesn't happen by accident. Diplomatic protocol is strict, painfully strict. Governments don't guess how to address someone connected to the British monarchy. They confirm, they verify, they ask questions. Someone answers those questions, which means someone confirmed Harry's status. So while the public narrative said private citizen, the behind-the-scenes reality said something very different. There was coordination, and coordination requires approval. That's where the unease sets in. Because you can't be both things at once. You can't demand independence while quietly benefiting from institutional recognition. You can't reject the system and still expect it to bend for you when things get uncomfortable. And yet, that's exactly what seemed to be happening. The security review didn't exist in a vacuum. It existed alongside unpaid legal fees nearing $2 million, alongside public claims of danger contradicted by real-world behavior, alongside refusals to provide itineraries that would have allowed protection in the first place. This wasn't confusion. It was selective enforcement. And the question no one wanted to ask out loud started echoing louder and louder. If the courts already ruled, if a private citizen isn't entitled to police protection, if public money isn't supposed to be used for non-working royals, then why was the system bending now? The answer isn't emotional, it isn't dramatic, it's institutional. A father trying to keep a son close enough to manage. A monarchy trying to soften optics without admitting weakness. A government absorbing costs quietly so no one has to explain why the rules changed after the verdict. But every time that happens, something breaks. Because rules don't just exist for one person, they exist so everyone knows where the line is. And when that line moves, depending on who you are, it stops being a rule and starts being a privilege. This was never just about Harry feeling unsafe. It was about who pays when power decides it's easier to bend than to enforce. And the public always pays last. That's the part that sticks in the throat. Because this isn't a family argument behind palace walls. This is about precedent, about accountability, about whether systems are strong enough to say no even when saying yes would be more comfortable. Harry's story keeps being framed as personal pain, as emotional fallout, as a son abandoned by his father. But when you strip away the sentiment and look at the timeline, what you see is choice after choice after choice. He chose to walk away. He chose to speak publicly. He chose to increase his risk. He chose to refuse cooperation. He chose to sue. He chose to appeal. He chose not to pay the legal costs. And then, when all of that failed, the system quietly shifted around him. That's not rebellion. That's leverage. And leverage only works when someone on the other end is willing to give. The security review hasn't concluded yet. No final outcome has been announced. No official explanation has been offered. But one thing is already impossible to deny. This wasn't chaos. It wasn't miscommunication. It wasn't compassion acting alone. It was a deliberate choice. And once power starts moving in silence, the noise that follows is never accidental. Because now, the public is left with the bill. Financial, institutional, and moral. Left wondering whether rules still mean what they say. Whether fairness still applies equally. Whether walking away from responsibility can somehow lead you right back into privilege. This story isn't over. It's only reached the point where consequences start lining up, waiting their turn. The door camera clip. The lost lawsuits. The unpaid millions. The refusal to cooperate. The cost difference no one wanted to explain. The risks created and then denied. And finally, the review that should never have existed. Put together, it paints a picture that's impossible to unsee. This was never about safety alone. It was about control. About who decides when rules apply and when they don't. About whether power protects itself even when it shouldn't. And when all of this finally settles, when the review ends and the paperwork is closed, one question will still hang in the air, refusing to disappear. Who really pays the price when power chooses silence over accountability? Because someone always does.